I'm a millionaire and infertile. I visited an orphanage in search of an heir and everyone was shocked by what happened. Subscribe to the channel to receive all our thrilling stories. I never thought a single day could alter the course of my entire life, but fate had other plans. My name is Alejandro Fuentes and I was once known as the most powerful businessman in Mexico City. I had it all: a thriving empire, a beautiful wife named Isabella, and a son, Miguel, who was the light of our lives. But on that fateful night, everything changed. The rain was relentless, pounding against the windshield of our luxury SUV as we made our way back from a charity gala. Isabella sat beside me, her emerald gown shimmering even in the dim light of the car's interior. In the back seat, our 8-year-old son Miguel dozed peacefully, exhausted from the evening's festivities. "Slow down, mi amor," Isabella cautioned, her hand gently resting on my arm. "The roads are treacherous tonight." I nodded, easing my foot off the accelerator. The winding mountain road was barely visible through the torrential downpour. Lightning flashed, illuminating the sheer drop to our right. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. "We'll be home soon," I assured her, forcing a smile. "Then we can all curl up by the fireplace with some hot chocolate. What do you say, Miguel?" There was no response from the back seat. Our son was lost in dreams, blissfully unaware of the storm raging outside. Suddenly, a blinding light flooded the car. I squinted, momentarily disoriented. A horn blared, and I realized with horror that a truck was barreling towards us on the wrong side of the road. Time seemed to slow down. I jerked the wheel hard to the right, desperate to avoid a collision. The tires lost their grip on the wet asphalt, and we were spinning out of control. Isabella's scream pierced the air as the world tilted on its axis. The last thing I remember is the sickening crunch of metal and the sensation of falling. Then, darkness. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I finally came to, it was to the steady beep of hospital machines and the antiseptic smell of a sterilized room. My entire body ached, and my head felt like it was split in two. "Mr. Fuentes?" a gentle voice called out. "Can you hear me?" I tried to speak, but my throat was parched. A straw was pressed to my lips, and I gratefully sipped the cool water. "Well, what happened?" I managed to croak out. "Where's my family?" The nurse's face grew solemn and my heart plummeted. "Mr. Fuentes, you've been in a coma for 3 days. There was a terrible accident." My mind raced, desperately trying to piece together the fragmented memories. The gala, the storm, the blinding lights. "Isabella? Miguel?" I pleaded, my voice breaking. The nurse's eyes filled with sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Fuentes. Your wife, she didn't survive the crash." The world seemed to shatter around me. Isabella, my beautiful, kind-hearted Isabella, gone? It couldn't be true. I wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all, but the pain in my body held me captive. "And Miguel?" I whispered, clinging to a shred of hope. The nurse hesitated, and that pause told me everything I needed to know. "Your son, he's missing, Mr. Fuentes. When the emergency services arrived at the scene, they found you and your wife, but there was no sign of the boy." "Missing? How could he be missing?" My mind reeled, unable to process the information. No, that's impossible. He was in the car with us. He must be somewhere." I tried to sit up, ignoring the searing pain that shot through my body. The nurse gently but firmly pushed me back down. "Please, Mr. Fuentes, you need to rest. The police are doing everything they can to find Miguel. Right now you need to focus on healing." But how could I heal when my entire world had been torn apart? Isabella was gone, and Miguel was out there somewhere, alone and possibly hurt. The weight of grief and fear threatened to crush me. As the days passed in a haze of pain and sedatives, I learned more about the extent of my injuries. The doctors spoke of internal damage, of the likelihood that I would never be able to father another child. But none of that mattered to me. All I could think about was finding Miguel. I hired the best private investigators money could buy, sparing no expense in the search for my son. Every lead, no matter how small, was pursued with fervor. But as weeks turned into months and months into years, hope began to fade. The media circus that surrounded the disappearance of the Fuentes heir eventually died down. People moved on with their lives, but I remained trapped in that moment. forever searching for the missing piece of my heart. Unable to bear the emptiness of our family home, I threw myself into my work with a vengeance. I expanded my business empire, not out of greed, but out of a desperate need to keep my mind occupied. Yet, no matter how successful I became, the void left by Isabella and Miguel remained. It was during this time that I began to notice my brother, Carlos, taking a more active role in the company. He had always been ambitious, but now there was a hunger in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. He pushed for riskier ventures, advocated for cutthroat tactics that went against everything Isabella and I had believed in. "We need to be stronger, Alejandro," he would argue. "In this world, it's eat or be eaten." But I couldn't bring myself to care about corporate power plays. My heart was elsewhere, lost in the memories of family picnics and Miguel's laughter echoing through our home. As the years passed, I found myself drawn more and more to philanthropic endeavors. Perhaps it was a way to honor Isabella's memory, or maybe it was an attempt to fill the gaping hole in my soul. I poured millions into building schools and hospitals, trying to create some good in a world that had taken so much from me. Yet, even as I cut ribbons and shook hands at charity events, my eyes would scan the crowds, always searching for a familiar face. In every young boy I saw echoes of Miguel. What would he look like now? Would he remember me? Was he out there somewhere wondering about his family? 15 years after the accident, I stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing the man staring back at me. Grey streaked my once dark hair, and lines of grief and worry had etched themselves permanently into my face. I was no longer the carefree, ambitious businessman I had once been. Life had changed me, molded me into someone else entirely. As I adjusted my tie, preparing for yet another day of meetings and public appearances, a thought struck me. Perhaps it was time to take a different approach. If I couldn't find Miguel, maybe I could honor his memory by helping other children who had lost their families. With renewed purpose, I made a decision that would once again alter the course of my life. I would visit orphanages, not just as a benefactor, but as a man looking for connection, for a chance to make a difference in a child's life. Little did I know that this decision would lead me down a path I never expected, one that would unravel the mysteries of the past and challenge everything I thought I knew about that stormy night 15 years ago. As I left my penthouse that morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something momentous was about to happen. The air felt charged with possibility, and for the first time in years I felt a spark of hope ignite in my chest. Little did I know, the storm that had torn my life apart was about to break, revealing truths that had been hidden in the shadows for far too long. The St. Maria's Orphanage stood like a beacon of hope amidst the bustling streets of downtown Los Angeles. As I stepped out of my car, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anticipation and trepidation. This was the 5th orphanage I had visited in the past month, each one stirring a complex whirlwind of emotions within me. The sound of children's laughter drifted through the air, a bittersweet reminder of what I had lost. I straightened my tie, took a deep breath, and made my way to the entrance. Sister Anna, the head of the orphanage, greeted me with a warm smile. "Mr. Fuentes, welcome to St. Maria's. We're honored to have you here." I nodded, trying to return her smile. "Thank you for having me, sister. I'm looking forward to learning more about your work here." As she led me through the corridors explaining their programs and the challenges they faced, I found my mind wandering. How many times had I imagined Miguel growing up in a place like this? The thought was almost too painful to bear. We entered a large playroom, filled with children of various ages. Some were reading, others playing games, but all looked up curiously as we entered. I felt a lump form in my throat as I met their eager gazes. "Children," Sister Anna announced, "this is Mr. Fuentes. He's here to learn about our home and maybe help us make it even better." A chorus of excited greetings filled the room. I managed a small wave, feeling overwhelmed by their enthusiasm. That's when I saw him. He was standing in the corner, helping a young girl with a puzzle. Tall, with dark hair and warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. For a moment, my heart stopped. It was like looking at a ghost, or rather at what Miguel might have become if... I must have made a sound because Sister Anna turned to me with concern. "Mr. Fuentes, are you all right?" I couldn't tear my eyes away from the young man. Who is that?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Sister Anna followed my gaze. "Oh, that's Daniel. He's not one of our residents. He's a volunteer. Been with us for about a year now, wonderful with the children." As if sensing our attention, Daniel looked up. Our eyes met, and I felt as if the ground had shifted beneath my feet. He smiled politely and made his way over to us. "Sister Anna," he greeted warmly, before turning to me. "You must be Mr. Fuentes. I'm Daniel Lopez." "It's an honor to meet you, sir." I stared at him, unable to form words. The resemblance was uncanny. The shape of his jaw, the slight dimple in his left cheek, even the way he stood reminded me so much of Isabella. "Mr. Fuentes?" Daniel's voice snapped me back to reality. I realized I had been silent for far too long. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "You just remind me of someone." Daniel's smile faltered slightly, a flicker of something, confusion, wariness, passing over his face. "I get that a lot," he said lightly. "Must have one of those faces." Sister Anna, sensing the tension, quickly intervened. "Daniel has been a godsend to us. He's studying child psychology at the university and volunteers here in his free time." I latched onto this information, desperate to learn more. "That's admirable," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What made you choose this field, Daniel?" He shrugged, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. "I guess I've always felt drawn to helping kids, especially those who've had a rough start in life." He paused, then added with a hint of hesitation, "I was raised in the system myself, so I know how important it is to have people who care." The system. My mind raced with possibilities. Could it be possible? After all these years? I must have been staring again because Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Is everything okay, Mr. Fuentes?" I forced myself to focus. Yes, I'm sorry. It's just been an emotional day." I turned to Sister Anna. "Would it be possible for me to speak with Daniel privately? I'd love to hear more about his experiences and how we might be able to improve support for children in the system." Sister Anna looked surprised but nodded. "Of course. Daniel, why don't you show Mr. Fuentes to the garden? It's quiet there." Daniel agreed, though I could sense a hint of reluctance in his demeanor. As we walked through the orphanage and out into the sunlit garden, I tried to calm my racing heart. I couldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. I needed to approach this carefully. We sat on a bench surrounded by blooming flowers. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could feel Daniel's eyes on me, curious and slightly wary. "Mr. Fuentes," he finally said, breaking the silence, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but is there a reason you wanted to speak with me specifically?" I took a deep breath. How could I explain the storm of emotions and suspicions swirling within me? "Daniel," I began slowly, "I want to be honest with you. When I saw you in there, it was like seeing a ghost from my past." His eyebrows furrowed. "I'm not sure I understand." 15 years ago, I continued, my voice thick with emotion, "I lost my wife and son in a terrible accident. My son, he was never found." I looked directly into his eyes, searching for any flicker of recognition. "You look exactly like I imagine he would have at your age." Daniel's eyes widened, a mix of sympathy and discomfort crossing his features. "Mr. Fuentes, I'm so sorry for your loss, but I'm not sure what you're implying." I leaned forward, unable to contain the hope that was building inside me. "Daniel, how old are you?" "I'm 23, he replied, a note of caution in his voice. My heart leaped. The age was right. "And you said you were raised in the system. Do you know anything about your birth parents?" Daniel stood up abruptly, taking a step back. "Mr. Fuentes, I appreciate your interest in the orphanage, but I'm not comfortable discussing my personal history. I think you might be reading too much into a coincidence." I realized I had pushed too hard, too fast. "I'm sorry," I said quickly, holding up my hands. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. It's just the resemblance is striking." He nodded, but I could see the walls going up behind his eyes. "I understand, sir. Loss can make us see things that aren't there. But I assure you I'm not your son, not your... I'm just a volunteer trying to make a difference." The finality in his tone was like a bucket of cold water. I had let my emotions get the better of me, potentially alienating someone who was just trying to help children in need. "You're right," I said, trying to salvage the situation. I apologize for my behavior. Your work here is commendable, and I shouldn't have made it about my personal tragedy. Daniel's posture relaxed slightly, but the wariness remained in his eyes. Thank you for understanding, Mr. Fuentes. Perhaps we should rejoin Sister Anna and discuss how you can support the orphanage? I nodded, standing up. As we walked back towards the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Daniel's story. The resemblance was too strong to be mere coincidence, but I had learned my lesson. If I wanted to uncover the truth, I would need to be patient and approach this from a different angle. Back in the office with Sister Anna, I made a substantial donation to the orphanage, all the while formulating a plan. I would need to investigate Daniel's background discreetly. If there was even the slightest chance that he could be Miguel, I owed it to my son and to Isabella's memory to uncover the truth. As I left St. Maria's that day, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in 15 years, I had a lead, however tenuous. I wouldn't let this slip away. I would find out who Daniel Lopez really was, no matter what it took. Little did I know that my quest for answers would unravel a web of secrets far more complex and dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The path ahead was fraught with challenges, and the truth, when it finally came to light, would shake the very foundations of everything I thought I knew. The drive back to my penthouse was a blur of conflicting emotions. Hope, doubt, and fear battled for dominance in my mind as I replayed my encounter with Daniel over and over again. His face, so achingly familiar, haunted me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the precipice of something monumental. As soon as I arrived home, I made a beeline for my study. The room, once a sanctuary of business dealings and corporate strategies, had become a shrine to my lost family over the years. Photos of Isabella and Miguel adorned the walls, their smiles frozen in time. I sank into my leather chair, my eyes drawn to a particular photo on my desk. It was the last picture we had taken as a family, just days before the accident. Miguel's gap-toothed grin beamed at me, his eyes sparkling with mischief. I picked up the frame, tracing Miguel's face with my finger. "Could it really be you?" I whispered to the photograph, as if it might suddenly come to life and provide the answers I so desperately sought. The rational part of my brain tried to temper my hope. After all, I had been down this road before. Over the years, there had been false leads, cruel hoaxes, and moments of aching disappointment. Each time, it felt like losing Miguel all over again. But this time felt different. The resemblance was uncanny, the age was right, and Daniel's background in the foster system, it all fit too perfectly to be mere coincidence. I reached for my phone, my fingers hovering over the contact for Jorge Mendoza, the private investigator I had worked with for years in the search for Miguel. I hesitated for a moment, then pressed call. "Alejandro," Jorge's gruff voice answered after 2 rings. "It's been a while. What can I do for you?" I took a deep breath. "Jorge, I need you to look into someone for me. His name is Daniel Lopez. He's a 23-year-old volunteer at St. Maria's Orphanage in Los Angeles." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Alejandro," Jorge said cautiously, "are you sure about this? We've been down this road before, and I hate to see you get your hopes up." I know, I replied, running a hand through my hair. "But this is different, Jorge. You should see this young man. He could be Miguel's twin." Jorge sighed, but I could hear the resignation in his voice. He knew better than to try to talk me out of it. "All right, I'll look into it. But Alejandro, promise me you'll keep your distance until we know more. We don't want to spook the kid or cause any legal issues." I agreed, though every fiber of my being wanted to rush back to the orphanage and demand answers. After ending the call with Jorge, I tried to distract myself with work, but my mind kept wandering back to Daniel. Days passed in an agonizing blur. I threw myself into my philanthropic work, making appearances at charity events and board meetings, all while anxiously awaiting news from Jorge. But even as I shook hands and signed checks, my thoughts were with the young man at St. Maria's. It was nearly a week later when Jorge finally called back. I answered on the first ring, my heart pounding. "What did you find?" I asked without preamble. "It's complicated," Jorge replied, his tone guarded. "Daniel Lopez's records show he entered the foster system as an infant. There's no information about his birth parents." My heart sank, but Jorge wasn't finished. "Here's where it gets interesting," he continued. "I did some digging into the orphanage where he was first placed. Turns out it was shut down about a year after Daniel arrived there. There were allegations of misconduct, records being falsified." I leaned forward in my chair, hanging on every word. "What are you saying, Jorge?" "I'm saying that Daniel's early history is suspect. The paperwork exists, but given the circumstances, we can't be sure it's genuine. There's a possibility that he could have been brought in from elsewhere." The implication hung heavy in the air. Could it be possible that someone had taken Miguel that night and placed him in the system under a false identity? "There's more," Jorge added, his voice dropping lower. "I've been looking into the accident again, Alejandro. Some things aren't adding up." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" "The truck driver that hit you that night, he disappeared shortly after the accident, and the official report, there are inconsistencies I can't explain." My mind reeled with the implications. For 15 years I had accepted the official version of events, a tragic accident on a stormy night. But now doubt began to creep in like a poisonous fog. "Jorge," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "are you suggesting that the accident wasn't an accident?" There was a long pause before Jorge replied, "I'm not sure what I'm suggesting yet, Alejandro, but I think we need to be very careful moving forward. If someone went to great lengths to cover this up 15 years ago, they might not take kindly to us digging now." The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. If the accident had been orchestrated, if Miguel had been deliberately taken, who could have wanted to destroy my family so completely? As if reading my thoughts, Jorge spoke again. "Alejandro, I hate to ask this, but is there anyone who would have benefited from your family's tragedy?" My mind immediately went to my brother, Carlos. He had taken on a larger role in the company after the accident, pushing for more aggressive business tactics. But surely he couldn't have been involved in something so heinous. I don't know," I replied honestly, "but I intend to find out." After ending the call with Jorge, I sat in stunned silence trying to process this new information. The photo of Miguel on my desk seemed to take on a new significance, his innocent smile now tinged with the shadows of a mystery I was only beginning to unravel. I knew I should heed Jorge's warning and proceed with caution, but the thought of Daniel, of Miguel so close yet still out of reach, was maddening. I had to see him again, to look into his eyes and search for any hint of recognition, any clue to his true identity. Before I could talk myself out of it, I was grabbing my keys and heading for the door. As I rode the elevator down to the parking garage, I tried to formulate a plan. I couldn't just barge into the orphanage demanding answers. I needed a pretext, a reason to see Daniel again without arousing suspicion. As I pulled out onto the bustling Los Angeles streets, a plan began to take shape in my mind. I would propose a mentorship program, offering guidance to young adults transitioning out of the foster system. It was a legitimate cause, one that aligned with my philanthropic efforts, and it would give me the perfect opportunity to spend time with Daniel, to get to know him better. The sun was setting as I arrived at St. Maria's, casting long shadows across the building. As I parked and made my way to the entrance, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, but the street behind me was empty, save for a few parked cars. Shaking off the paranoia, I squared my shoulders and entered the orphanage. Whatever secrets lay buried in the past, whatever dangers might lurk in the present, I was determined to uncover the truth. For Miguel, for Isabella, and for the life that had been stolen from us all those years ago. Little did I know that my impromptu visit would set in motion a chain of events that would not only challenge everything I thought I knew about my family's tragedy, but would also put me on a collision course with forces I never knew existed. The shadows of the past were stirring, and the storm that had begun 15 years ago was far from over. As I stepped into St. Maria's for the second time that week, the air felt thick with unspoken tension. Sister Anna greeted me with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Mr. Fuentes, what a pleasant surprise. We weren't expecting you back so soon." I mustered my most charming smile, the one I reserved for board meetings and press conferences. "Sister Anna, I hope I'm not intruding. I've been giving a lot of thought to our conversation about supporting the children here, and I've had an idea I wanted to discuss with you." Her eyebrows raised with interest. "Of course, please come to my office." As we walked through the corridors, my eyes scanned for any sign of Daniel, but he was nowhere to be seen. In Sister Anna's modest office, I outlined my proposal for a mentorship program, watching her face light up with enthusiasm. Mr. Fuentes, this is exactly the kind of support our young adults need as they transition out of the system. But may I ask, why the sudden interest in this particular area? I had prepared for this question. My son would have been about the age of these young adults now. I suppose I see this as a way to honor his memory, to help those who are where he might have been. Sister Anna's eyes softened with sympathy. That's very admirable of you, Mr. Fuentes. I'm sure your son would be proud. A lump formed in my throat at her words. If only she knew how close to the truth she might be. There is one thing, I added, trying to keep my voice casual. I was hoping to involve some of your current volunteers in the program planning. Daniel Lopez, for instance. His perspective as someone who's been through the system would be invaluable. Sister Anna nodded, seemingly oblivious to my ulterior motives. That's an excellent idea. Daniel is one of our most dedicated volunteers. I'm sure he'd be happy to help. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Daniel poked his head in, his eyes widening slightly when he saw me. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt," he said, starting to back out. No, come in, Daniel," Sister Anna beckoned. "Mr. Fuentes was just telling me about a new mentorship program he wants to start. We were hoping you might be interested in helping to develop it." Daniel hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting between Sister Anna and me. I held my breath, silently willing him to agree. "I'm sure I'd be happy to help," he finally said, though I could detect a note of uncertainty in his voice. "Wonderful," Sister Anna beamed. "Why don't you two discuss the details? You can use the conference room down the hall." As Daniel led me to the conference room, I could feel the tension radiating off him. Once inside, he turned to face me, his posture defensive. "Mr. Fuentes," he began, his voice low and controlled. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't help feeling there's more to this than just a mentorship program." I sighed, realizing that my transparency had failed me. This young man was perceptive, much like Isabella had been. The thought sent a pang through my heart. "You're right," I admitted. "Daniel, I know my behavior the other day was unsettling, but please hear me out." He crossed his arms but nodded for me to continue. "I've spent the last 15 years searching for answers about what happened to my family, and when I saw you, it was like seeing a ghost. I know it sounds crazy, but I can't shake the feeling that there's a connection." Daniel's expression softened slightly, but the wariness remained in his eyes. "Mr. Fuentes, I understand you've been through a terrible loss, but I'm not your son. I have my own history, my own struggles." I know, I said quickly. "But Daniel, what if your history isn't what you think it is? What if there's more to your story?" He frowned. "What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath, knowing I was about to cross a line. "I had someone look into your background. The orphanage where you were first placed, there were irregularities, falsified records." Daniel's face paled. "You investigated me? Without my permission?" "I'm sorry," I said, realizing too late how invasive my actions must seem. I had to know." He turned away, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. "This is insane. You can't just come in here and turn my life upside down because of some resemblance. I know how it sounds," I pleaded. "But please, just consider the possibility. There are too many coincidences, too many unanswered questions." Daniel whirled back to face me, anger flashing in his eyes. "And what if you're right? What then? Do you expect me to just slip into the role of your long-lost son? To forget everything and everyone I've known?" His words hit me like a physical blow. In my desperation to uncover the truth, I hadn't fully considered the impact it might have on Daniel's life. "No, I don't know," I admitted. "I just want the truth, for both of us." Daniel's shoulders sagged, the anger draining out of him, replaced by a weariness that made him look older than his years. "Mr. Fuentes, I sympathize with what you've been through, but I can't be who you want me to be. I have my own life, my own identity." I nodded, feeling a mix of shame and disappointment. "I understand. I'm sorry for pushing this on you. If you want nothing more to do with me or the mentorship program, I'll respect that." He was quiet for a long moment, seemingly wrestling with some internal conflict. Finally, he spoke. "The program, and it's a good idea. It could help a lot of kids. I won't walk away from that just because of this situation. Relief washed over me. It wasn't acceptance, but it was a chance to get to know him, to perhaps uncover the truth in a less confrontational way. "Thank you," I said softly. "I promise from now on, everything will be above board. No more investigations, no more pushing, just honest collaboration on the program." Daniel nodded, though I could see he was still guarded. "All right, but Mr. Fuentes, I need you to understand something. Even if by some miracle it turns out that I am your son, it doesn't change who I am now. I can't be the boy you lost." His words were like a knife to my heart, but I knew he was right. 15 years had passed. The little boy in the photo on my desk was gone, replaced by the young man standing before me. Whether he was Miguel or not, I would have to accept him for who he was now. "I understand," I said, "and I promise to respect your boundaries." As we shook hands, sealing our uneasy truce, I couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of a much longer, more complex journey. The truth was out there, hidden in the shadows of the past, and I was more determined than ever to bring it to light. But as I left St. Maria's that day, a new worry began to gnaw at me. If there really was a conspiracy surrounding the accident and Miguel's disappearance, would my renewed interest in the case put Daniel in danger? And what about my brother, Carlos? How deep did this web of secrets go? I realized that in my quest for answers, I might have stirred up forces that had long lain dormant. As I drove home through the bustling Los Angeles streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. But there was no turning back now. For better or worse, I was committed to seeing this through to the end, wherever it might lead. The following weeks passed in a delicate dance of careful interactions and measured words. Daniel and I met regularly to develop the mentorship program, our conversations strictly professional, yet tinged with an undercurrent of unspoken questions. Each time I saw him make a familiar gesture or heard him laugh in a way that echoed Isabella's, my conviction grew stronger. But it was during one of these meetings that everything changed. We were reviewing program proposals in St. Maria's conference room when my brother Carlos made an unexpected appearance. He strode in unannounced, his designer suit a stark contrast to the humble surroundings. "Alejandro," he exclaimed, spreading his arms wide. "So this is where you've been hiding yourself." I stood, surprised and slightly alarmed by his presence. "Carlos? What are you doing here?" His eyes slid to Daniel, and something in his expression made my blood run cold. It was brief, just a flicker of recognition quickly masked by a practiced smile, but it was enough to set off warning bells in my mind. "Can't a brother check up on his beloved hermano's charitable endeavors?" Carlos replied smoothly. "Besides, the board is concerned about how much time you're spending here instead of at the office." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I should give you two some privacy," he said, starting to rise. "No," I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Please stay. Carlos was just leaving." My brother's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "Actually, I thought we could all have dinner together. My treat. I'd love to hear more about this mentorship program." Before I could refuse, Daniel surprised me by accepting. "That would be nice. Thank you, Mr. Fuentes." And so, an hour later, we found ourselves seated at an exclusive restaurant in downtown Los Angeles, the tension at our table thick enough to cut with a knife. Carlos ordered expensive wine and made small talk, but I could see him studying Daniel when he thought no one was looking. "So, Daniel," Carlos said casually, swirling his wine glass, "how long have you been volunteering at St. Maria's?" "About a year," Daniel replied, his guard clearly up despite his polite tone. "And before that?" "Where did you grow up?" I interrupted. "Carlos, this isn't an interrogation." My brother laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Can't I show interest in my brother's charitable work? After all, family is everything, isn't it?" The emphasis he placed on the word family sent a chill down my spine. Did he know something? Had he somehow been involved in what happened 15 years ago? Daniel excused himself to use the restroom, leaving me alone with Carlos. As soon as Daniel was out of earshot, Carlos's demeanor changed completely. "What do you think you're doing, Alejandro?" he hissed, leaning across the table. "I don't know what you mean," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Don't play dumb with me. I know you've been investigating the accident again." Hiring private investigators, digging up old records. Let sleeping dogs lie, hermano. My hands clenched under the table. What do you know about the accident, Carlos? He sat back, his face unreadable. Only what everyone knows. It was a tragedy. But the past is the past. You need to let it go before someone gets hurt. Is that a threat? A warning, he corrected, his voice soft but menacing. From someone who cares about you. Drop this crusade of yours. Focus on the company, on your real family. Before I could respond, Daniel returned to the table. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced pleasantries and meaningful glances. When we finally parted ways, Carlos pulled me aside for one last warning. Stay away from the boy, Alejandro. Some questions are better left unanswered. I watched him walk away, my mind racing. Carlos's reaction had confirmed my suspicions. He knew something about what had happened that night. But how deep did his involvement go? Later that night, as I sat in my study reviewing the security footage from my office building, a habit I'd developed since starting my investigation, I noticed something strange. The camera outside my private elevator had captured Carlos entering my office late at night, several times over the past few weeks. I pulled up the footage from inside my office and felt my blood freeze. There he was, rifling through my desk drawers, accessing my computer. In one clip, he was on the phone, speaking urgently to someone. I enhanced the audio, straining to hear his words. Becoming a problem needs to be handled, just like before. My hands shook as I reached for my phone to call Jorge, but before I could dial, a text message appeared from an unknown number. Meet me at the Old Saint. Catherine's hospital tomorrow at midnight. Come alone. I know the truth about your son. The abandoned hospital had been one of the last places the missing nurse who had allegedly taken Miguel had been seen. My heart raced as I stared at the message. Could this be the break I'd been waiting for? But Carlos's warning echoed in my mind. Was I walking into a trap? And more importantly, by pursuing this, was I putting Daniel in danger? I thought of the young man who might be my son, of the lost years, of Isabella. The truth had been buried for too long. Whatever risks lay ahead, I had to know. I typed a quick reply. I'll be there. Then I opened my safe and removed the small handgun I kept there, hoping I wouldn't need it but unwilling to take chances. As I checked the weapon, my eye caught the reflection of a shadow moving past my window. A shadow that shouldn't have been there, given that my penthouse was on the top floor. I rushed to the window, but there was nothing there except the glittering Los Angeles skyline. Still, the feeling of being watched persisted. Someone was playing a dangerous game, and I was just beginning to understand the rules. I spent the rest of the night preparing, making copies of all my evidence and storing them in secure locations. If something happened to me, the truth wouldn't die with me. I also wrote a letter to Daniel, explaining everything I knew and suspected to be delivered if I didn't return from the meeting. As dawn broke over the city, I realized there was no turning back. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was darker than I could have imagined. My own brother's involvement, the mysterious text, the shadows at my window. It all pointed to a conspiracy that had been carefully maintained for 15 years. But who else was involved? And more importantly, who could I trust? As I watched the sun rise over Los Angeles, I knew that the next 24 hours would either reveal all the answers I'd been seeking or lead me into a trap from which there might be no escape. Either way, the game was about to change and the stakes had never been higher. The day before my midnight meeting crawled by with excruciating slowness. I went through the motions of my normal routine, attending meetings and signing documents, all while my mind raced with possibilities and contingency plans. Around noon, I received an unexpected visit from Daniel at my office. My secretary's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing his arrival, and my heart leaped into my throat. "Send him in," I said, quickly clearing the surveillance photos from my desk. Daniel entered, looking troubled. "Mr. Fuentes, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all," I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Is everything all right?" He sat down, fidgeting with the strap of his messenger bag. "Something strange happened this morning. A woman approached me outside St. Maria's. She said she knew my mother." I leaned forward, every nerve in my body suddenly alert. "What did she tell you?" That's just it. She didn't get the chance to tell me anything. She seemed scared, kept looking over her shoulder. She handed me this envelope and then practically ran away. Daniel pulled a worn manila envelope from his bag. With trembling hands, I accepted the envelope. Inside was a single photograph, yellowed with age. My breath caught in my throat. It showed a hospital room and in it a nurse holding a baby. But what made my blood run cold was the woman standing next to them, Isabella. That's my wife, I whispered. Daniel stared at the photo, his face pale. The nurse in this picture, she looks exactly like the woman who gave me the envelope today. My mind raced. The missing nurse. She was alive, and she was trying to make contact. But why now? And why through Daniel? Daniel, I said carefully, I need you to go somewhere safe, stay with friends, somewhere unexpected. Don't tell anyone where you're going, not even me. His eyes widened. What's going on? Are we in danger? Before I could answer, my office door burst open. Carlos strode in, his face thunderous. When he saw Daniel, he stopped short, his expression flickering between surprise and something darker. Well, isn't this cozy? He said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Family reunion? Daniel stood up quickly. I should go. No, Carlos said, moving to block the door. I think you should stay. We have much to discuss. I rose from my desk, my hand inching toward the drawer where I kept my gun. Let him leave, Carlos. My brother's laugh was hollow. Always the protective father, aren't you, Alejandro? Even when you don't know the whole story. Then tell me, I challenged. Tell me what happened that night. Tell me why you've been trying to keep me from discovering the truth. Carlos's face hardened. You want the truth? The truth is that some secrets are better left buried. The truth is that you're playing with forces you don't understand. Mr. Fuentes, Daniel interrupted, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. Both of you, I think it's time you told me what's really going on here. Carlos turned to him, something almost like pity crossing his face. You really don't know, do you? About who you are, about what happened to your real family. Carlos, don't, I warned, but my brother continued, his words measured and deliberate. Your mother, Isabella, she wasn't supposed to survive that night. None of you were, but she was stronger than we anticipated. And you were supposed to disappear completely. Daniel stumbled back as if physically struck. What are you saying? He's saying, I interjected, my voice shaking with rage, that the accident wasn't an accident at all. It was orchestrated by my own brother. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel looked between us, his face a mask of shock and confusion. But why? Carlos straightened his tie, his composure returning. Business, family, power. It's all connected. Alejandro was too soft, too focused on charity and good works. The company needed stronger leadership. So you tried to eliminate your own brother's family? Daniel's voice was filled with horror. I tried to save our family's legacy, Carlos snapped, and I would have succeeded if that meddling nurse hadn't interfered. She took you from the wreckage before my men could arrive. By the time we tracked her down, she'd already hidden you in the system. My head spun with the revelations. All these years, my own brother had been behind everything. The accident, Miguel's disappearance, the cover-up. The nurse, I said, remembering the photograph. She's trying to expose you, isn't she? That's why she contacted Daniel. Carlos's smile was cold. She can try. But after tonight, it won't matter. Everything will be taken care of just like it should have been 15 years ago. The threat in his words was unmistakable. I moved to stand between him and Daniel. You're not going to hurt anyone else. It's over, Carlos. Over? He laughed. Brother, it's far from over. In fact, it's just beginning. He reached into his jacket, and I tensed, expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out his phone. One call, that's all it takes. My men are already in position at St. Maria's, at Daniel's apartment, even outside Isabella's hospital room. My blood ran cold. Isabella's? What are you talking about? Carlos's smile widened. Oh, did I forget to mention? Your beloved wife didn't die that night. She's been in a private facility all these years in a coma. Another insurance policy I kept just in case. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Isabella was alive? All this time? Daniel's voice cut through my shock. You're bluffing. Am I? Carlos held up his phone, showing us a live video feed of a hospital room. There, lying still and pale but unmistakably alive, was Isabella. I gripped the edge of my desk, my legs threatening to give out. First Miguel, now Isabella. How many more secrets had my brother kept from me? "What do you want?" I managed to ask. "What I've always wanted," Carlos replied. "Control of the company, complete and legal. Sign everything over to me and your family lives. Refuse and—" He let the threat hang in the air. I looked at Daniel, my son finally found after all these years, and thought of Isabella lying helpless in that hospital bed. The choice was impossible, yet crystal clear. But as I opened my mouth to respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway outside. Carlos turned toward the noise, and in that moment, everything changed. The door burst open, and there, standing like a ghost from the past, was the nurse from the photograph, flanked by police officers. "I think," she said, her voice steady, "that we all have a lot to talk about." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of revelations and emotions. The nurse, Maria Ramirez, had been gathering evidence against Carlos for 15 years, working with a small group of trusted investigators to build an airtight case. She had recorded conversations, collected documents, and tracked money trails that revealed the full scope of my brother's schemes. We sat in a secure conference room at the police station, the truth finally spilling out after years of silence. Maria's hands trembled as she spread photographs and documents across the table. "I was working the night shift when they brought you all in," she began, her eyes distant with memory. "I knew something wasn't right. The injuries didn't match the accident report, and then I overheard two men talking about making sure the job was finished." Daniel sat beside me, his face a mask of contained emotion as he listened to the story of his own abduction. I wanted to reach out to him, to offer some comfort, but I wasn't sure if he would welcome it. "I couldn't let them hurt a baby," Maria continued, "so I took him. I had a friend at St. Catherine's Orphanage who helped me hide him in the system. We created a new identity, new papers. It was the only way to keep him safe." "But why didn't you come forward sooner?" I asked, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Carlos had people everywhere. I tried once early on to contact the authorities. The next day, my brother's house mysteriously caught fire. The message was clear: stay quiet or people would get hurt." Daniel spoke up for the first time since we'd arrived at the station. "So everything I thought I knew about myself, it was all a lie?" "Not everything," Maria said softly. "Your kindness, your strength, your desire to help others, those are all real. Those are the parts of you that remind me so much of your parents." I watched as Daniel absorbed this, saw the conflict playing across his face. He was struggling to reconcile his identity as Daniel Lopez with the truth of being Miguel Fuentes. "And my mother?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's really alive?" I pulled out my phone, showing him the video Carlos had revealed. "In a private facility all this time. Carlos kept her hidden as leverage, but now we can bring her home," a new voice said from the doorway. We all turned to see Jorge, my private investigator, entering with a stack of papers. "I've located the facility. It's a private medical center just outside the city. They're expecting us." My heart leaped. After 15 years, I would see Isabella again. But would she wake up? Would she recognize us? The doctors Carlos had hired had kept her stable, but what kind of recovery could we expect? "There's something else you should know," Jorge added, his expression grave. "We found evidence that Carlos wasn't working alone. There were others involved, powerful people who stood to benefit from taking control of your company. The board members," I realized. "Some of them must have been in on it." Jorge nodded. "We're looking into all of them, but right now, your priority should be your family." Family. The word held new meaning now. I looked at Daniel, who was staring at the photo of Isabella on my phone. Would you like to come with me to see her?" I asked hesitantly. He was quiet for a long moment before responding. "I think I need some time. It's a lot to process." My heart sank, but I understood. His entire world had been turned upside down in the space of a few hours. "Of course," I said. "Take all the time you need, but please let us arrange protection for you. Carlos may be in custody, but his associates are still out there." Maria stepped forward. "He can stay with me. I have a safe house that no one knows about. It's where I've been hiding all these years." Daniel looked at her with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "You saved my life." "I did what any decent person would do," she replied. "And now I can finally stop running." As arrangements were made for Daniel's security and Isabella's transfer to a better facility, I found myself standing at the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. So much had changed in just one day. My son was alive, my wife was found, and my brother's betrayal was exposed. But this wasn't the end of the story. It was in many ways just the beginning. We had years of separation to overcome, wounds to heal, trust to rebuild. Daniel might never see me as his father, and Isabella might never wake up. The future was uncertain, filled with both hope and challenge. A gentle touch on my arm pulled me from my thoughts. It was Daniel. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady. "I'd like to come with you to see her. Not because I'm ready to be Miguel Fuentes again, but because she's my mother, and she's been alone for too long." Tears pricked at my eyes as I nodded, unable to speak. "But I need you to understand something," he continued. "I can't just slip back into being your son. I need time to figure out who I am now that I know the truth. Can you give me that?" "Yes," I managed to say. "Whatever you need. We have time now." As we prepared to leave for the medical facility, Maria approached with one final piece of evidence, a letter Isabella had written the day before the accident. It was addressed to Miguel to be opened on his 18th birthday. Carlos had intercepted it, but Maria had managed to save a copy. Daniel took the envelope with trembling hands but didn't open it. "Later," he said, tucking it carefully into his jacket pocket. "When I'm ready." Outside, the sun was rising over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. A new day was beginning, bringing with it the promise of healing and reconciliation. But as we drove toward the medical facility where Isabella waited, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were still mysteries to unravel, still truths to uncover. The web of lies and betrayal that had torn my family apart was bigger than just Carlos. Someone had helped him maintain Isabella's secret facility. Someone had helped him track Maria all these years. Someone had helped him infiltrate my company. But those were questions for another day. Right now, all that mattered was the young man sitting beside me in the car and the woman we were going to see. After 15 years of searching, my family was finally within reach. As we pulled up to the medical center, Daniel turned to me. "Whatever happens in there," he said, "whatever comes next, thank you for never stopping looking for me." In that moment, I saw a glimpse of the little boy I'd lost, and my heart swelled with hope for the future we might build together.